accountant sitting on stage, which sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke. But in all seriousness, ICOs are really important, especially the legal, and are taking in consideration the legal and the tax aspects of them. And there's a lot of bad information floating around out there on the internet. And so one of the questions that I wanted to dive in with the panelists is, what are the biggest myths that are going around the internet that are completely untrue that people launching ICOs need to know about? And I'm going to start with Rob, since he's kind of the odd one out on this panel.
All right, Sarah. So at home, I have a 5- and a 7-year-old, and we talk about spelling at the dinner table. One thing I like to tell them is that blogs and bullshit both start with a B. Okay? So this is the truth. So be careful about what you read. There's a lot of mistruths out there. And so maybe take it with a grain of salt. These are people trying to hype up what's going on and give you provocative data. And there's a lot of stuff that's not right. One of the biggest things out there from a tax perspective is that you can trade a token or crypto with one another and treat it as a like-kind exchange. This is absolutely taxable. I'm so sorry to disappoint those of you who like to trade around to this stuff, but every time you trade crypto or a token for another type of property or service, this is highly likely to be a taxable transaction, just like a barter exchange would be. So this is a big deal. The other one is that people get really enamored with foundations, right? And it is really hard to execute an ICO, as sophisticated it is, within a foundation. It can be done, but really hard. This is a constraining type of entity, and that translates around the world, right? That sort of constraint. So when people are enamored with this in the blogs, I think they need to just cool their jets a little bit there. So those are the two big ones for me.
Yep, everyone's a crypto expert these days, right? So we'll just continue down the line. Marc?
Sure. So for me, I'd say it's the what goes around when talking about doing an international ICO, and I kind of touched on it. But dealing with it, if you're a person in the U.S. and you have a majority of your shareholders in the U.S. And you are going to, and there's other little parts to that specifically, but most situations where a majority of the voting stock is held by U.S. people, you can do an offering outside of the U.S. And whether your entity is in the Cayman Islands or your entity is in the U.S., you're going to have the same issues, which is the SEC says, hey, go ahead and sell to non-U.S. people. That's fine with us. But if you want to send any of those securities back into the U.S., then we have a problem with that. And we're going to take a look at what those securities look like and who it is that's selling them. And if it's let's call them a U.S. person for this sake, that ultimately is selling them, then you're going to fall into a category under Reg S that's going to cause certain transfer restrictions certain restrictions to apply in terms of transferring those tokens back into the U.S. And so really you can't just say, hey, I'm going to do a non-U.S. offering and we're all good to go. That doesn't work. I think the second thing that I hear a lot about is people, or rather just people don't even pay attention to, is the fact that when you are granting tokens as an award to anyone in the company, that is another offering. And again, if you're a non-U.S. company, and this even applies if you're completely non-U.S., you don't have U.S. shareholders, but now you have advisors in the U.S. or you have a management in the U.S. That is now an offering in the U.S., and according to the SEC, that is now a security that you are offering in the U.S. And so, when you take a look at that situation, you start needing to look at what regulations apply, and so it starts getting actually very difficult unless you've got a lot of accredited investors that are going to be receiving tokens. You start needing to rely on Rule 701, which has its limitations, and so it actually ends up being very difficult to comply with the laws and have a ton of tokens allocated to U.S. people.
A lot of these self-described utility tokens that we see, they're guaranteeing profits, or they say they'll pay dividends. They put in vesting periods, and they have a lot of features that look a lot like securities. And you really have to look at these ones, and they're the ones that get shut down by the SEC because they're just such low-hanging fruit and so easy to go after. If they're trying to guarantee a profit to the potential purchasers, not even investors of their, again, self-described utility tokens, those are the ones that get shut down. So you really have to assess what these tokens are, and like Rob said earlier, there's a lot of FUD out there as well. Look at as many channels as you can, social media, read all the blogs, read their white paper, look at who their advisors are. A lot of them have fake advisors. Do a lot of due diligence before just putting your money into any of these tokens, because I'd say the vast majority of them have a lot of misinformation, either done by others or even done by themselves, and you have to be careful out there.
And what about misinformation when somebody is launching an ICO? Do you have any comment on that rather than being someone that buys them, like someone who's launching one?
Well, there's two types of misinformation, really. There's intentional misrepresentation or misinformation put out by these ICOs themselves just to drum up interest and create the hype train. And there's also misinformation by third parties that just don't understand the space, and they're either trying to pump it up as well so they can quickly flip the token. And on the issuer side, if you're creating the token, just go get legal advice. And before you put out any piece of information, clear it with your lawyers and make sure that it's okay to say that.
One thing about security tokens that comes up a lot is people think that definition transcends all types of lenses, and the tax lens does not necessarily apply to the definition of security on a security token. So you can have something that fits the definition under securities laws as security, but it will not qualify as security for tax, meaning it could still be taxable. So that's one thing that comes to mind for me.
Securities, tax, commodities, money transmission. I mean, tokens hit every single aspect of regulation there is. So don't just look at securities regulations, look at everything.
Yeah, and I think that ties into what my what I think is probably the biggest myth out there, which is, and I'm guilty of using this expression myself, but when people talk about, well, this is so new and it's a square peg round hole problem. The reality, especially in the U.S., is that our laws have always been designed, and our lawyers have always been trained to take new sets of facts and sift them through existing rules and existing case law and existing legal constructs. And so I guess just to underscore what everyone else has said up here, it really is worth checking in with your advisors early and often, and making sure that you're not going to hit up and get yourself into any trouble or put yourself in a position that you later find yourself wanting to backtrack from, because there are a lot of interesting and complicated legal constructs that tokens and ICOs hit up against.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to come back to you, Sarah, and ask you that if you could design your perfect token sale for your ICO launch, how would you do it?
I don't know if the better answer is to say there is no perfect token launch, or to be a lawyer and say it depends. But I think there are two sides to the same problem, which is it really does depend on what it is that you're building. I think the best way to approach a token project is not to ask, how do I design the token? It's to ask, how am I building a platform or a project that requires a token that blockchain technology or a token can uniquely enable in a way that no other existing computing systems can enable. And I think Polymath is a great example of that. They're building a platform and an entire network that solves some of the KYC problems, that solves some of the accredited investor problems that are really tough problems to solve if you're trying to break into money transmission, or you're trying to break into securities issuances. And especially if you're trying to do so on a distributed and international scale. I think the best way to approach a token sale is not to ask, how do I design the best token? It's to ask, well, what project and what network am I trying to build? And the token should just be an underpinning part of the project and new network that you're looking to enable.
I fully agree with that, Sarah. And I think it also comes down, if you are going to go ahead and sell a token, it comes down to the token economics. And if you look at IPOs, they don't all come out at the same price. They don't all come out with the same number of shares. It varies depending on the product, and that should be the same for tokens as well. You have to decide on a price, decide on the total number of tokens, decide on the circulating supply, and it's really those features that these potential purchasers or investors are going to look at. And obviously, before you do the sale, you need to consult with your legal team and find out, who can I sell this to? Do they need to be accredited? Do they need to be from certain jurisdictions only? And then go ahead on a proper path to make sure that your sale only happens to those allowed parties.
Yeah, and I'd say let's set aside infrastructure plays and just talk about kind of other types of tokens. I'd personally say take a look at the business that you actually want to build, And go back to just the fundamentals of building any early stage company. We want to build something that users are going to love. And so then when you look at that and you say, okay, do we actually need a token to help users love this platform? And if that's the case, then you ask, okay, what does this token need to look like for our users? Only at that point do you then say, okay, now lawyer, tax advisors, while you should have them in early, you should only be asking them at that point, now help me frame this in a way that's going to work and that's going to keep me out of trouble. And I think a good lawyer, a good tax advisor is going to help you work around those issues while letting you kind of continue to achieve your business purpose.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you want to do what's natural, right? People start off too often trying to say, this is the result I want from a legal perspective, a tax perspective. Now let's like fit it in there, which that just doesn't feel right. And they're doing stuff that's artificial. They're trying to work themselves into this crazy international structure or this token design that goes against the fundamentals of the core blockchain value proposition that the token is bringing to the equation, right? How does the token bring something to the table that fiat could not? Right, specific to blockchain. I mean, that's where people really set themselves apart. And so when you're doing something that's natural, and then you start to say, okay, where are the humans? Where do they exist? Where they're going to do something naturally? What are the jurisdictions that they exist, right? And then you can start to inform the legal structure and the design. And what are the humans doing? Importantly, their roles. So I think just doing something that's natural, if it feels unnatural, you really should pause and say, is this the right thing to do? And then work with your advisors together at the table, right? It seems like a lot of people, but we collaborate pretty well. So put us together and we'll help consult and get you to the right answer.
I think also it's not just what can the token do that fiat cannot, it's what can the token do that Bitcoin cannot or that Ethereum cannot. Why is there the need for an additional token on top of the already existing ones?
Yep.
So have a reason for your token. All right, we've only got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to shoot out a really quick question. If you can just give a sentence or two answers so we can get through everybody. But what's the most important thing with ICO launches and token design that you wish people knew who were going to be having an ICO this year or planning or thinking about it? Sarah?
I think I've said it already. I think it's talk to your advisors early and often, and be patient, I guess, is the other piece to that, because oftentimes what people don't see if they ask their advisors a question is that we're internally processing really difficult questions and questions that haven't been asked before and making sure all possible subject matter experts are able to weigh in because we were on your team and we don't want to see bad things happen to you.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'll agree with Sarah. Get legal advice early and often.
And I'd say just don't think you're kind of smarter than all the regulators out there, because the truth is they're actually pretty smart.
Yep, 100% agree. And not just bringing people in early, but recognize it actually doesn't cost you more to bring people in early. What happens is you're adding grace to the equation. If you let things take their normal course and let people vet it, it makes things more graceful for you as you're designing what the business is, and for us, to be honest, right? Make it enjoyable for everybody. This should be fun. So don't sort of cram it into a 10-day period. That's kind of miserable. So
this is why Rob won't let me do Kardashian coin.
All right.
Never.
Well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much. And the panelists, I believe, will be out and about. So if you see them, feel free to ask them any questions you have. All right, thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.